قال راوي السند ناقلا عن سيدي منتهى سير الرجال شرعنا المحمدي.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلي وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So spirituality, I think, is a term that you don't really actually locate within, let's say, a traditional paradigm understanding of Islam, something that came from somewhere else. And if you try to translate it, it comes out to something like ruhaniya, something to do with the spirit. And actually, I think we could safely say that within our understanding of Islam, that there's no kind of distinction between, the sort of Cartesian body-spirit separation, and everything is addressed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The general topology that's kind of been articulated by Imam al-Ghazali is that everybody has aql, which is an intellect, and has a nafs, which is the ego and the life force, and has a ruh, which is the spirit, and has a qalb, which is the spiritual heart. And those four things still are one and the same, they're just looking at it from different aspects. So the intellect is looking at, looking at the awaqib, the ramifications of one's acts and where they might lead to, and then to stop and not do them, that sort of thing. And the nafs is the ego, which is also the life force. So the part that seeks pleasure and that seeks satiation, so forth, that is the nafs. And then the qalb, that discerns between truth and falsehood. And that's kind of how the Muslim theologians looked at it. And then the ruh, which is kind of the highest form, or the most, or the purest form of humanity, of the human being, which is in, I say, direct connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for prophets and messengers, that would be in the form of revelation. And then for other people, especially the awliya and the siddiqun, that would be in the form of ilham, of divine inspiration. And all of those things are, well talked about in the Quran and the Sunnah, and about tazkiyat al-nafs, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Whoever purifies the nafs, then it allows the other aspects of who you are, namely your aql and your qalb and your ruh, to come through and kind of hold the steering wheel, more than the nafs, which just tries to lead you to instant gratification and satiation and so forth. So everything about the deen is actually spiritual in that sense. Spirituality is not divorced from what we do or from the law. Even to use the word Islamic law is kind of a misnomer. What we have is something more about the sharia and the tariqah and the haqiqah. So the sharia is knowing what to do, the tariqah is walking what you know to do, and then the haqiqah could be that spiritual aspect of then receiving from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and increasing you in that path, that sirat al-mustaqim, inshallah. So I think spirituality is, we cannot take it away from Islam. And at the same time, it's not something separate from Islam either. Well, as in the case with the word spirituality, the word religion also is kind of misplaced in the Islamic context, I think. So the word we use, deen, it's not the same as religion. Religion has kind of taken on this other, I would say, definition within most societies today, that it denotes what one does in a ritualistic sense. If you go to church, you go to synagogue, or you now even go to the masjid, the mosque, and the activities that you do there, and kind of the things that are associated with a ritual practice of the deen, or of the faith, or of the religion. And for us, deen is much broader and wider than that. It's not just about how you worship. Everything is literally worship. And that even includes what, quote unquote, mundane affairs. So there's nothing really secular within Islam. And at the same time, there's nothing really religious in the sense, because you have to look at the religious versus the secular to understand how those two interact together. But we don't have that paradigm. But if I were to address the question today, why some people would prefer spirituality over religion, religion is associated with the practitioners of religion, and spirituality is more associated with kind of a more direct connection to the divine, and less about how the practitioners of the religion. So whether it's a priest, it's a rabbi, or it's an imam, or it's an alim, for many reasons, different reasons that I think we don't have time to go through, but there is a bit of an aversion to people of religion in that sense, or what they would call organized religion. And a lot of it has to do with a different experience than the Muslim experience, especially with the church in Europe, that this aversion kind of grew and took hold, and people want to believe in God and they want to feel like there's a sublimity, sublimeness around them. Even atheists talk like that. Even, Richard Dawkins and others have used the word sublime and how they describe the universe. So there is kind of perceived spirituality, but there's an aversion to religion in the sense that these people are dictating to me how to go about defining my spirituality. Whereas in our sense, no one is dictating to anyone. We have people who are specialists who interpret what Allah is saying to us, what God is saying to us, so that we may behold the sublime in everything and behold the spiritual in everything. But to address the question of religion versus spirituality or spirituality, again, that's not really in our context, right? So in our tradition, we have ritual observance, obviously, and we have also this kind of, let's call it, again, for lack of a better word, ruhaniya, or spirituality, and the idea of the spirit of the action. Some of the great scholars like Ibn Atha as-Sakandari used that word. He said that the deeds are just outward forms, and the real secret to them is the sincerity that he called the spirit, right? Arwahuha. So the spirit of the deed is what cannot be seen. So generally, spirituality in general refers to something that cannot be seen. So I think people's aversion to religion and religiosity goes back to certain religious stances taken by so-called people of religion. And I think for the most part, people turn away from religion, not necessarily because of the religion itself, but some of the experiences they had for people who are affiliated with religion. And most of the kind of the new atheist works like Dawkins and others, they talk a lot about the church and the priesthood and things like that, and they're pointing out to the kind of human folly aspect of it. And within our tradition, we don't deny that there's human folly. We say that there is, but there's something that transcends all of that, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent this eternal, timeless message via the wahi, via the Quran, in both the Quran and the hadith. And we do need some level of specialization to understand how to take that and apply it to our everyday lives. But we don't have a priesthood that is dictating just by their word what God is saying, or what God's mind is, as they would say. We're looking at the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and interpreting them. And there's a breadth of interpretation, and there are certain parameters, obviously, that has to go within. But if we completely abandon that, we will be left with neither religion nor spirituality. If everyone is left to self-define their own spirituality, well, like we said, just as a group of human beings, there could be errors that come from them. What about the individual? So if every individual is doing that, then how many errors can we think that will be there? And what sort of camaraderie and what sort of spirit of togetherness and community will come out of when everybody's self-defining their own spirituality? So I don't think it's possible, actually, but we also have to look at the root of why do people have this issue with so-called religion and they're okay with spirituality. Well, tasawwuf, simply defined, is the purification of the heart so that you have a purification of the limbs. And if the heart is that which is kind of the master and the king over everything else, then that's where we begin. So how people are conceptualizing things, thinking about things, how they are reacting to the actions of others, the manner in which they are offering ritual or performing ritual observances, that also comes into the science of tasawwuf. Like when they say, "Laysa kullu musallin muqim," not everybody who prays is actually establishing the prayer. So doing it in a manner that does actually prevent you from iniquity and from vice and from all sorts of things, because it's conceptually possible that you can be doing all the things right, but somehow you're still falling into a lot of issues. And the reason for that is because the inner has not been adequately addressed and purified. And the science of tasawwuf does that. Some people equate tasawwuf or Sufism with kind of, this thinking about the higher realm and celestial beings and, things of the unseen and so forth, and karamat and saintly miracles. And while we're not denying that that is part of our own total understanding, that's not the objective of tasawwuf at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's looking at your own inner issues and vices and correcting them and taking from there. It was prophetic, and we were taught by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And it actually happened during the first encounter in Ghar Hira between the Prophet ﷺ and the angel Jibreel alayhi salam, when he came and he asked the Prophet to read Iqra. He said, "Ma ana biqari" 3 times, and there was kind of a violent shaking that happened at the same time. And many of the ulama of tarbiyah, which is actually the practical side of tasawwuf, how to nurture souls so that they can be the best version of themselves, say that this is the precedent for tarbiyah, that there was a type of tarbiyah that happened there, nurturing of the soul of Muhammad ﷺ. And in one of the hadith that's narrated upon him, "Addabani Rabbi fa ahsana ta'dibi." My Lord has nurtured my soul, and He is the best nurturer of souls. And so that paradigm also extends to how the Prophet ﷺ did that for the Sahaba, did that for the companions. And then the companions also performed the same thing for their followers, the Tabi'een and so forth. So there has to be what's called a sheikh or a murshid or a guide, generally speaking, or another believer, for lack of a sheikh or a guide, who will help you to see your own mistakes. Al-mu'min mar'atul akhi, or mu'min mar'atul mu'min. The believer is the mirror of the believer. So, we help each other in that regard, because you can't point out. It's very difficult to find your own mistakes. Your ego is always going to tell you it's way better than it actually is, and it's quite difficult. And for very, very, very few individuals, it might be theoretically be possible. But for the most part, people need teachers, people need nurturers, people need practitioners. And we basically accept that in everything else about life. No one's going to be a pilot or an architect or train in the gym, except they first had some instruction and a guide to show them how first, and then they do that. And this is even, more precarious in terms of matters of the soul, and more significant, more important. So that has been the paradigm. The best way to talk about that would be the hadith also of Jibreel, the hadith that he came in the form of a man in front of the companions, asked him 4 questions, the first 3 referring to what you're talking about. So Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. So Islam, the 5 pillars, and Iman, the 6 pillars of faith, believing Allah and the messengers and His books and the Day of Judgment and the angels and the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That forms Iman, and we know the 5 pillars of Islam. And then Ihsan was not a list of things that we hold to be true, or the list of ritual observances, but rather the modality of all of that. How we go about actually doing Islam and Ihsan. Ta'budullah ka'annaka tara. Worship Allah as if you see Him. If you don't see Him, know that He sees you. So this is how to deliver ihsan, or to deliver excellence to everything that we do. And so theology, which is the study of the divine and everything about the divine, and even looking at how we conceptualize or otherwise prove the existence of the divine, that's studied in theology, or in ilm al-kalam, or in aqidah, or in creed. And then jurisprudence or fiqh or Islamic law looks at the ritual observances, and also everyday things like marriage, divorce, commercial transactions. But in the science of ihsan, this is where we talk about tasawwuf and spirituality, and they're all aspects of the same thing. So there is no practice of the fiqh or of the law without also practicing and infusing within it the ihsan, the spiritual side. And you can't practice ihsan, you can't infuse spirituality or excellence in something unless you know what that thing is to begin with. You can't just It needs a qalib, right? It needs a vessel, and that is your ibadat, your acts of worship, the things that you say, your interactions with people, and so forth. And all of that has to be grounded by seeing reality as it really is, not having a distorted understanding of reality. So there's no ihsan without knowing that Allah is the creator of all and the creator of the muhsin, the one who does the ihsan, and all of the things that we do. So all of those come together, and they're actually all the same, but for us to kind of just understand them and conceptualize them, we talk about Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. Well, maybe to put it in a simple way is you have to learn to read properly. And by reading here, we mean obviously the Quran and reading and knowledge, but just as important, reading the book of creation. So everything around us has been made a sign. And in fact, the verses of the Quran, ayat, mean signs. And Allah talks about in the Quran about the signs all around us. وَفِي الْأَرْضِ آيَاتٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ. And in the earth, there are ayahs, there are signs for those who have certainty or want to increase their certainty. And also in the celestial realm, there are signs. So it's really about all of these beautiful gifts and faculties we've been given. We can see, we can hear, we can interpret, we can conceptualize, we can have images in our head of things that we saw, and then they're not in front of us, we still maintain them. Those are all very amazing things. And all of those blessings are there so that we can interact with this kawn, with this existence that Allah has created for our benefit, for ourselves, so that we may interpret it, read it, use it in the best way in order to fulfill the covenant between Allah and ourselves. And that is the way to knowing God.